Hi, everyone. I'm Elaine Quijano. Merry Christmas, and thank you for joining us. We begin this Christmas Day in Washington, where the partial government shutdown is in its fourth day with no immediate end in sight. Here's a look at the White House, where President Trump is spending his holiday after canceling plans to visit his Mar-a-Lago estate in Florida. He addressed the shutdown earlier after speaking on the phone to U.S. troops.
The people of this country want border security. You know, it's not a question of me. I'd rather not be doing shutdowns. I've been at the White House, and I love the White House, but I wasn't able to be with my family. I thought it would be wrong for me to be with my family. My family's in Florida, Palm Beach, and I just didn't want to go down and be there when other people are hurting. But it's going to all work out. But many of those workers have said to me and communicated, stay out until you get the funding for the wall.
About 800,000 federal workers are affected by the shutdown. More than half are considered essential and expected to go back to work tomorrow without pay. The House and the Senate will meet Thursday, but no deal is expected before the new year. Mola Lenghi has the latest.
I want you to know that every American family is eternally grateful to you.
President Trump wished U.S. troops a Merry Christmas from the Oval Office Tuesday and took questions on a range of issues, including the partial government shutdown, now in its fourth day.
It's not going to be open until we have a wall, a fence, whatever they'd like to call it. I'll call it whatever they want.
The president canceled plans to spend the holidays in Florida because of the impasse over funding for his border wall with Mexico. About 800,000 federal workers are affected. The president says the workers understand.
Many of those workers have said to me and communicated, stay out until you get the funding for the wall. These federal workers want the wall.
President Trump also weighed in on the Federal Reserve a day after he tweeted that the Fed is the only problem facing the economy.
They're raising interest rates too fast. That's my opinion, but I certainly have confidence, but I think it'll straighten.
U.S. stocks suffered the worst Christmas Eve losses ever. The Dow plunged 653 points, hitting its lowest level of the year. U.S. stocks are on track for their worst December since the Great Depression. Mola Lenghi, CBS News, the White House.
CBS News national correspondent Chip Reid is also at the White House. So, Chip, let's start with his government shutdown. We heard the president's Oval Office comments from this morning. Earlier, Democratic leaders Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer said President Trump is plunging the country into chaos. Is the White House willing to give up any ground when it comes to this border wall?
I tell you, it's really hard to tell from the comments he just made from the Oval Office earlier this morning. At one point, he said the government will not reopen until we have a wall or a fence or whatever you want to call it. I think what he meant was until he gets the funding he's asked for, $5 billion. But that $5 billion, he was asked later, is that a concrete number? And he waffled. He said, well, it's complicated. He went on and on about what's being spent and what's being done on the wall now to strengthen it. And it's really unclear. It sounded like he was taking a very tough negotiating position at the beginning. Then it seemed he was giving some wiggle room. So you can read into this whatever you want, but we're just waiting to hear some kind of official word from the White House once Congress comes back, or at least the leaders come back, as to what's going to happen here. But it's really a mystery right now.
So let's add to all of this, a Democratic House majority arrives in the new year. How is that fact complicating negotiations?
Well, it's certainly going to make it more difficult for the president. As Chuck Schumer said over the weekend, this is the Democratic official position, their tough negotiating position. He said, Mr. President, if you want to reopen the government, you must abandon the wall, showing no compromise there whatsoever. So, again, they're not really giving their real positions right now. They're doing negotiating through the media, and we're going to have to wait until they get back to see what happens after they go behind closed doors. Again, from the Democratic side, it's really a mystery what they're willing to give in at this point, too.
So it's interesting, Chip. The president also said today that he will visit Texas at the end of next month. Can you tell us anything about that?
Well, that's the first we've heard it. His announcement that he'll be going to the border to see to do a groundbreaking of sorts on a 115-mile section of the wall. He mentioned that yesterday in a tweet, but they've given us no details on that, where it is, whether it really is wall or fence, or whether it's just improving fence that's already there, where the money's coming from. The White House is giving us no details on that. No surprise, this being Christmas. They don't usually put out newsy stuff, but when the president talks like that in vague terms where he doesn't explain exactly what he's talking about, again, all we can really do is read the tea leaves, Elaine.
Yeah, and you wonder if even people in his administration are aware of his plans at this moment.
Absolutely correct.
So, meantime, Wall Street is responding to the latest out of Washington. Stocks had their worst Christmas Eve in history. President Trump is blaming this in part on the Federal Reserve. What is the White House message here, Chip?
Well, I think what you just said is exactly what it is. He's been talking a lot about the Federal Reserve recently and how they're raising interest rates too fast. He says they don't get it. They don't understand the economy. These are some of the best economists in the nation. But I think what he's really doing is saying it's not my fault.
So, Chip, on another topic, we now know that Patrick Shanahan will be the acting defense secretary following the sooner-than-expected departure of Defense Secretary Jim Mattis. Can you just sort of help fill in some of the storyline here? Tell us what we know about this transition and remind people who perhaps have been busy with the holiday bustle how this all came about.
Well, Jim Mattis, of course, was one of the president's big heroes at the beginning of the administration. He loved calling him his Mad Dog nickname, which apparently Mattis detests. But because he's not a mad dog, he's a very rational and very strong person. Very scholarly, very smart man. But the president soured on him over time, and Mattis really did not like the way that President Trump treated allies, and sometimes seemed to treat enemies better than allies, and that really grated on Jim Mattis, and he made that clear to the president. And finally, with this Syria decision, Mattis thought the president had just gone too far, said, I'm going to resign, but I don't want to resign until early next year. And the president, after he saw the resignation letter and realized that Mattis had taken some slams at him, decided, nuh-uh, you're out of here. So you're out of here by the end of this year. And with the new guy coming in, he's an executive at Boeing, a very knowledgeable person in the field, but apparently is willing to follow the president's line on these issues, including in Syria.
All right, so more to come on that. And finally, Chip, President Trump says that he's received an invitation from Turkey's President Erdogan to meet in 2019 as the U.S. pulls out of Syria. Remind us of the stakes in that potential meeting.
Well, they're enormous. Obviously, there is a tremendous disruption at the Pentagon over pulling out of Syria. So suddenly the president is now saying it's going to be a very orderly and slow pullout. He claims the American people and the troops themselves actually support this. It's not clear that that's the case at all, and certainly the brass at the Pentagon does not support this. But the stakes are very high. An enormously complicated situation over there. It's like playing three-dimensional chess. You've got Russia, and you've got Turkey, and you've got Syria, and Iraq, and Iran all involved in this, and it's just really unclear with this kind of what some people would call an impulsive decision, whether it's good for American security or not.
All right, we'll wait for details on that. Chip Reid at the White House sporting a very festive holiday tie. I really dig it, Chip. Looking good.
I just went wild. Just went wild.
It works. It works. Thanks so much, Chip. Have a great holiday.
You bet. You too.